Hey everyone, how we doing? All right, excited to be here in Indianapolis. Obviously, the past few weeks we spent a lot of time just looking at everything, soup to nuts, organizationally, coaching staff, roster, everything across football operations, to make sure that we can, make the necessary improvements to really be where we want to be in the 2023 season. We always get really excited about the combine because it's really our first look with the upcoming draft class. We spent probably upwards of the last 10 or 11 months, researching these players, scouting these players, and it really gives us our first, interpersonal touch point where we get to spend a little bit more time with them, a little bit more extended time with them here in Indianapolis. So that's always very exciting for us, and it really kicks off the 2023 offseason for us. So we enter the year with really energized and with a ton of enthusiasm and looking forward to improving the team and the roster. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Can you talk about how the Senior Bowl actually is a part of your process?
Yeah.
The scouting combine?
No, that's a great question. The Senior Bowl we view as the premier all-star event, in the off season for college players. I'd say honestly, Jim Nagy and his staff, they do a phenomenal job. It allows us to see a lot of the top prospects in the draft. It gives us really phenomenal access in a controlled environment, with those players. I also think one of the added elements that the Senior Bowl does is for players that come from maybe lower levels of competition, getting the right guys in front of NFL scouts and decision makers, and putting them in an environment where they can play against NFL talent more consistently. But without the Senior Bowl, I should say that the Senior Bowl is just a huge benefit for us throughout the scouting process.
Andrew, John Johnson's in the news as a surefire cap casualty. Would you comment on that, and how do you anticipate replacing him with a young player or a veteran?
Yeah, Tony. First I'll start by saying, John, really first probably thought is just like gratitude in terms of what he's done the past 2 years on the field and in the locker room for us. We did, after just looking at the roster and thinking about where we want to be in 2023, thought it would be the best move for the organization to really part ways. But that certainly doesn't minimize what John was able to do while he was with our team.
Can you replace him with a young player or a veteran?
All of that really is to be determined, Tony, to be honest. It's a long off season that, really doesn't formally begin until the middle of March. So as we always do, we'll stay flexible, we'll stay, adaptable, and try and map our resources to opportunities.
At the running back spot, does it make you feel better to have a guy, speaking of the Senior Bowl, does it make you feel better to have a guy like Jerome Ford there with Kareem Hunt, I guess is set to be free, Dearness Johnson? What have you seen out of him, and do you think he's a guy that eventually could play a role?
Yeah, Jerome, we thought did a nice job for us his rookie year. His main contributions were really within the kicking game and carved out a nice role as a really strong kick returner for us. One of the things that drew us to Jerome throughout last year's draft process, is his ability in the passing game, and he'll certainly have opportunities going into his second year to potentially showcase those skills on a more extended level.
How difficult or easy it is to create the cap space that you're going to have to create?
I'm sorry, do you say that one more time, Scott,
How
please?
easy or difficult is it to create the cap space that you're going to need to make the moves that you want to?
Yeah, it's a good question, Scott. I think really we look at really kind of two different mechanisms. We look at the cash that we want to spend, and then the cap is really an accounting mechanism for that. The rules are flexible. Whether it's releasing a player, trading a player, restructuring a deal, negotiating an extension. There are a number of different avenues to create cap space, and the approach that we would take would really be dictated by the opportunities in front of us.
And
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you've been trying a couple different times. So,
No,
yeah.
it's all good. What stands out about the uniqueness of this year's draft for you? Understanding you don't have a first-round pick. I mean, the depth of the draft and positionally where the strengths are.
Honestly, I get asked this question every year, and to be honest, I think going into any year, there's a lot of uncertainty. I've come to realize just how much you don't know in terms of prospects as they transition into the NFL. I know every year there are good players and players that we would target, or players that will like the process, and that's no different than this year. But I firmly believe that there are going to be quality players every year, throughout the draft. So for me, it's always tough to talk about, maybe, whether it's, depth at the top, depth in the middle rounds, depth by position, because oftentimes we go and look back at those draft classes and it turns out a lot different than maybe we anticipate. So we try our best to go in with that, I guess that may be, intellectual humility, with the fact that, what we think today may be a lot different than how we see it down the line.
Andrew, how much, since he's gotten into the building, has Jim had a kind of an input and made his mark in terms of personnel and kind of game planning out what the next couple of months look like for you?
Yeah, so we've always been a firm believer, as a front office, in partnering with our coaching staff, and that, that has always been the case with Kevin. That will always be the case with our coordinators, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are able to map personnel, strengths, skill sets to the offense, defensive, or kicking game philosophy. And that'll be no different than with Jim. It certainly does help that, having worked with Jim before and having some level of familiarity, have a pretty good sense of, what he wants in different, excuse me, different different parts of the defense, but that'll always be the case with our coaching staff.
Does he contribute to the John Johnson decision?
1 second, Tony.
Did he get an evaluation given to you?
Yeah, we would always stay in communication with our coaching staff or our coordinator for a decision like this. One of the first things we'll ask, really any coach that is in the organization at the end of the year, evaluate their position group or evaluate their side of the ball, and then from there we'll have the meaningful strategic discussions as we modify the roster.
Hey, Andrew, and you? A couple reports recently about Deshaun Watson making progress in his clinical treatment. Do you have any updates as far as to what that progress was, and if he's still in treatment currently?
I definitely understand the question. To be honest, I don't think that's an appropriate question for me to answer in this setting, but I will say that we're pleased with where Deshaun is, pleased with the progress that he's made since he's been with us, and certainly anticipate him having a very strong year on and off the field going into 23.
What's the expectation for David Bell in year number 2?
I'm sorry?
What's the expectation for David Bell in year number 2?
Yeah, I think for all of our young players, we'd like to see them, continue to make steps forward. I think David, as a rookie player, really did a nice job just in terms of his reliability. Whether that's mentally, we were able to put him in a number of different spots throughout the year. And really, his biggest strength physically is, really his hands, catching the ball, catching in his frame, outside of the frame. We'd like to have him take a step in year 2 in terms of, taking further advantage of his targets and getting more familiarity with our offense. But we're pleased with him as a rookie. Would like to see all of our young players progress.
With Deshaun on the field, I think he even admitted that he wasn't his best season this past year. How do you quantify the way that he played? Are you still as high on him moving forward?
Yeah, we're very excited about Deshaun. We are looking forward to continue to evolve the offense over the next several months. Obviously, having him have a full off season going into 2023, and certainly expect him to play at a high level this upcoming year.
Andrew, in your first 3 years, your top 100 picks have all been 22 years or younger. Going into year 4, is there anything about that could change as you kind of look at where your team is, having a franchise quarterback, or is that maybe a guardrail for you in your position?
I feel like I've heard this term guardrails for a number of years now. To be honest, I think perhaps more is made of the age considerations than maybe how we actually think about it. We really do try and treat each prospect on the individual merits of their career. I'm not going to suggest that that's not part of the equation for certain players, but just because a player is older is coming out doesn't necessarily mean they have a lower ceiling. And likewise, just because a player is younger coming out doesn't necessarily mean that they have more potential. So we really try to make those considerations on an individual basis. Who knows? Maybe that'll change this upcoming year.
Andrew, there's some question as to the change of coordinators. Was it an organization decision or a coaching decision?
Yeah, so first and foremost, Kevin is the driver of the coaching staff. That's not to suggest that we don't have discussions or there's not some level of counsel. No different than how we think about roster decisions or player decisions. But at the end of the day, Kevin. His goal and his mission is to make the decisions that he thinks are best for the team, and he has always done that, and he'll continue to do so.
Andrew, this is always an important time of the year. Do you personally feel any extra urgency this year?
Feel urgency every year, Zach, to be honest. I mean, I think we all feel like we have an incredible responsibility to the organization and to the city, to put a good team out on the field. But I think that probably if you don't feel urgency, and honestly, you don't feel excitement, to be honest, that's probably the biggest feeling. If you don't feel excitement, you're in the wrong role.
Do you think that other sort of big name players, veterans of yours like John Johnson III, will also be released between now and March 15th?
I mean, too hard to say. I think it really just depends on circumstances and what opportunities come before us in the next several months. I don't have a crystal ball in that matter, but probably the easiest thing to say is we are very excited and feel very good about the core of the team.
Andrew, when you talk about the sense of urgency, I know you try to balance short-term and long-term when you build the roster, but does it shift a little bit given the state of the roster, given the fact that it's 2 straight seasons without going to the playoffs?
No, I think every year your goal is to make sure that you get to the playoffs. And I do think that there are different points organizationally where your roster, your core is in a different place. We feel really good about a lot of our key and top players, being in the middle of their prime, and certainly think that this is a year where we can, be very competitive. But we want to be competitive every year. That's really the goal. We want to be, playing deep into the season every year, and that'll be the goal.
I've seen Kevin Stefanski kind of get a bad rap in the media. What would you say is the biggest strength to his coaching style with you having worked alongside him?
I think Kevin's level-headedness. Quite honestly, I think it's easy to ride the wave of emotion, for really any head coach in the NFL. And Kevin is very much a steady hand at the helm, and I think it serves our organization, and I think it serves our team very well.
How has the draft and free agency process kind of changed for you guys over the last year when you have a quarterback that makes as much money as Deshaun does? What kind of things change when that happens?
I don't think anything really changes in the draft and free agency process in terms of the preparation. I've said this a number of times that we really go into each offseason as if we have an expansion roster. We really go through it like need agnostic. How that influences decision making, because the reality of it is when you do have an expensive quarterback, you do have a different set of constraints in terms of roster building. That may change. That may change from year to year, but how we go through the approach and how we go through the preparation, that really doesn't.
Right. Would it benefit then to have him locked in and kind of know where he's at cap-wise for the next handful of years?
I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that one more time?
Is that a benefit then to kind of have him at a set number for the next couple of years and kind of know where you're going to be at cap-wise every year?
I don't know that it's necessarily a benefit, because even that can change based on your yearly strategy. That's not to suggest that that's not a contract that could get touched at some point in the next several years. So, I wouldn't say that in and of itself drives anything.
Right now, you have one center under contract.
Sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Right now, you have one center under contract. Is Nick Harris the starting center?
To be determined, quite honestly, Tony. I think there's a lot of work to do on the roster. We're sitting here in, say, February or say first day of March? Okay, last day of February. There's a lot that needs to be done until we get to August and we're competing for roster spots.
Is reducing Deshaun's number something you might need to do?
It could be on the table, but there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what we can do from a cap perspective.
A couple more. What do you find to be the benefits of your front office structure with the 2 assistant GM?
Yeah, I guess honestly, it was a model I saw when I worked in Philadelphia under Howie, and almost the way that I think about it is a lot of times the general manager's role in season is largely focused on helping run the day-to-day of the team. And then out of season, it's really the focus is on the roster, and probably no different than like if you're a head coach, right? Your responsibilities reside offensively, defensively in the kicking game. So I almost look at it as like the equivalent of like an offense and defensive coordinator, so to speak, where you have individuals who are very broad and can do maybe everything across the football operation spectrum, but they may have a specialty in terms of helping you from a day-to-day perspective depending on the time of the year.
What has Catherine brought, and why was she someone you wanted to add to the organization?
Yeah, quite honestly, Catherine's one of the most talented front office executives I've ever had the pleasure of working with. There's literally nothing that she cannot do. She can evaluate, she can manage, she can lead. She's really strong in contract management, super smart, super strategic. So honestly, looked at it as an opportunity just to add, who I view as like a rock star, within the front office, and just the additional benefit of having had some prior work history was certainly a bonus. But she's outstanding and one of the most talented executives I've had the pleasure of working with.
Andrew, a lot of attention around the league right now on the Lamar Jackson situation.
On the
Lamar Jackson contract situation. When you guys signed Deshaun, obviously you wanted him. Was there any thought that this might kind of change the paradigm for guaranteed contracts?
Yeah, I don't know that it would really be appropriate for me to comment on Lamar or anything like that. It's probably a better question for another team.
Andrew, you have 2 draft picks in the first 4 rounds next year. How does that impact kind of looking at trades or decisions you make this year? Is there any thought to that?
It probably depends on the individual circumstance, to be honest. Yeah, that's probably the best way to say it. I don't know that there's anything systematic or formulaic in that regard because, that's where we sit as of February 28th or 27th or whatever the date is today. But a lot can change between now and then.
You got time for one more? We sent out a memo about best practices for interviewing prospects, important this time of year. So, do you find something like that useful? And then how do you make sure that, you are respectful of, a player during that entire process?
I'll be honest, that's not something that we've ever really had a problem with. So, I don't know. We can't end on that one, Peter. Come on, go ahead.
Given Deshaun's contract last year is fully guaranteed, do you think in 5-10 years we'll look back and see that as like a pivotal moment? There's more of those contracts, or might that be a standalone? Do you have thoughts on how that contract may affect future contracts?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Deshaun's fully guaranteed contract last year was unique. Do you think that could be the first of many similar contracts in the future?
I don't have a crystal ball for that, to be honest. My guess is it's probably more unlikely that it would, but I don't have a crystal ball. So, all right, thank you all.